Hello and welcome. Tonight we stroll quietly through the narrow, uneven streets of old Paris, not toward a riot, not toward the pounding of revolutionary drums, but into a slower, gentler space, into sleep. The kind of sleep where the cobblestones don't bruise your feet, where the guillotine doesn't loom at the town square, and where the bread might actually be soft. Maybe. Tonight, we're not storming the Bastille. We're just trying to survive a very bad day in a very messy time. Now, before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you like my content. Your support truly means a lot to me. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I'm genuinely interested in knowing who is joining us from around the world. The French Revolution is often told in big, bold headlines: liberty, equality, fraternity, followed very closely by chaos, guillotines, and several wigs being flung from balconies. But behind all of that, there were people, ordinary people, people who never gave speeches, never plotted in secret clubs, never carried flags or muskets. They just tried to get by. And it was hard, very hard. Imagine this. It's the late 1780s and you live in Paris, or maybe in a village not far from it. Your home is made of cold stone, or mud and wood if you're out in the countryside. There's no insulation, no glass on the windows. If it's summer, it's hot and sticky and full of flies. If it's winter, it's like sleeping inside a brick, with holes in it, the kind that lets the wind whisper you into pneumonia. Your roof leaks, your chimney doesn't work, your neighbors are too loud, or maybe too quiet. Either way, there's not much you can do about it. Your landlord hasn't fixed anything in 5 years, and you're behind on rent anyway. Taxes are due, again, even though you paid them last month, and the month before. There's always a new one, a salt tax, a bread tax, a tax on windows, or on dreams. It's hard to tell the difference these days. In the streets of Paris, the smell of revolution isn't romantic. It's mostly sewage. The sewer system, you see, is less of a system and more of a theory. Waste runs in the gutters. Horses drop their thoughts on every corner, and people throw their chamber pots out the window. Hopefully not on you, but probably on someone. You walk fast, and with your mouth closed. And the markets? They're not charming stalls with garlic ropes and cheerful merchants. They're chaos. Bread is outrageously expensive, if there's any. People push, shove, and yell. One time last week, someone threw a turnip. No one knows why. Maybe frustration, maybe artistic expression. Either way, he was fined. Meanwhile, in the countryside, things aren't much better. You're probably a tenant farmer, working land that isn't yours. You've planted the seeds, ploughed the fields, prayed to whichever saint handles barley, and when harvest comes, most of it goes to someone else. You owe grain to your landlord, to the church, to the taxman, and by the time you bring a sack home, you're too tired to do anything with it but stare. This is the France that existed just before it exploded. Not the France of powdered wigs and perfume, but of sour porridge, cold mornings, and people quietly wondering when something, anything, might change. And yet, change didn't come all at once. It crept in like mold behind the walls, little whispers in cafes, pamphlets passed around in secret, a neighbor who says too much and then vanishes, a noble carriage that gets rocks thrown at it. No one talks about revolution out loud, not yet, but everyone feels it, like a storm just beyond the hill. And amidst it all are the people who never asked for any of it, who didn't want to storm anything, who just wanted to eat something, a warm crust of bread. The French Revolution would change the world. It would topple kings, terrify queens, and inspire generations. But before it did that, it turned ordinary days into tightropes. You couldn't speak freely, you couldn't eat easily, and you couldn't predict who'd be in charge tomorrow. Tonight, we'll follow one such life, one faceless name in the crowd, not a general, not a revolutionary leader, just someone trying to get through a Tuesday. Someone like you, or me, if we'd had the misfortune of being born in a time where speaking too loudly about bread could get you arrested, or applauded, or both. It really depended on the hour. So take a breath, the kind they didn't have time for, and exhale the weight of guillotines and taxes, and too many monarchs with too little sense. Let the past soften into shadows. Let the rough edges of revolution smooth themselves into cobblestone dust. You don't need to fight. You just need to listen. To walk slowly. To feel the worn wooden floor beneath your bare feet. Because now we're stepping into another morning. Not one of glory or drama, but of dirt, of hunger, and of stubborn, quiet survival. The kind that builds history, and also desperately wishes it could nap more often. Next, we'll wake up in one of those drafty rooms, somewhere in the corner of the city or the edge of a forgotten village, where the first sound you hear isn't a trumpet of liberty, but the creak of your neighbor's snore and the soft complaint of your stomach reminding you that the bread ran out yesterday, and possibly the day before. The morning begins not with a sunrise, though it does eventually show up, but with the drip, 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 from the leaky corner of your ceiling, that rhythmic, passive-aggressive reminder that your landlord hasn't patched the roof since Louis XV still had teeth. You open your eyes and blink into the gloom. There is no candle left to light. You burned the last one 2 nights ago. Now, you rely on the grey light slipping past broken shutters and grimy panes. Your home is generous, if you define generosity as 4 walls, most of a ceiling, and a draft that whispers through every crack like a ghost looking for better housing. The bed is shared, maybe with a sibling, a spouse, a child, or an unfortunate dog that wandered in and decided to stay. The mattress is straw, more pokey than plush, and smells faintly of old socks and damp regret. Sheets? A single rough blanket, shared among everyone who isn't lucky enough to be sleeping beside the fireplace, which is currently just a pile of ash and hope. You stretch. Bad idea. Something cracks, and it's probably your back, or maybe the rafter above you. Either way, it's not good. There's no time to lie there. No time to meditate, reflect, or scroll through anything except your own list of unpaid obligations. The rent is due, the baker's tab is overdue, and the taxman will likely knock on your door again soon, demanding coins you do not have for purposes you do not understand. You'd ask where the money goes, but the answer is usually away. You sit up, head pounding slightly from the cold, or from the fact that yesterday's wine was stretched with a bit too much river water. Welcome to the breakfast buffet. There's bread, if you can call it that, a crust the texture of roofing tile, possibly older than the building. It's stale, hard, and dry, which is why you soften it in your morning beverage. Watered wine, weak ale, or a thin broth if you're feeling luxurious. No jam, no butter, not even a wistful sniff of something sweet. Just bread, wine, and the gritty aftertaste of survival. In the countryside, it's not much better. You might have an onion, a cold boiled potato from yesterday, maybe a turnip that rolled under the table 3 days ago and decided to return as breakfast. If you're lucky, there's a communal pot still warm over the hearth, thin soup shared between too many mouths. Your clothes are the same as yesterday, and the day before, because you only own one full set. Wool, coarse and scratchy, patched so many times it's more thread than garment. There are holes you pretend not to notice and a button that's been threatening to escape for weeks. Your shoes, if you're fortunate, you have a pair. Wooden soles, leather cracked and softening into nothing. If not, it's bare feet on stone and frost. If you're a seamstress, your hands are already stiff from yesterday's stitching. If you're a labourer, your shoulders ache from lifting someone else's wealth. If you're a peasant farmer, the tools are already waiting, silent and judging, in the frozen soil outside. You have no time to think. Thinking doesn't pay. Not that anything does, really. Across town, someone with a powdered wig and a fondness for lace is yawning into silk sheets and considering which flavoured chocolate to melt for breakfast. But you don't think about them. Not much. They live in a different France, one with chandeliers. You live in the France with peeling walls and mould-shaped like questionable saints. The city around you wakes slowly. Vendors drag carts through narrow alleys, calling out wares that are probably overpriced and definitely underweight. Chimneys begin to belch smoke. A neighbour shouts at a pig that wandered into the street. Someone else is already arguing with their landlady, and far above, church bells ring, marking the time you're already late for. There is no schedule, just work, if you have it. Day laborers wait in clusters, hoping to be chosen for construction, cleaning, or delivery. Women queue at the communal oven, holding loaves to bake or buckets of laundry to rinse. Children are sent on errands with coins they're terrified to lose. And someone, always someone, is sweeping endlessly because the city never stays clean and the nobles never see the mess anyway. What's most crushing isn't the work, it's the invisibility. You are part of the crowd that holds France upright, but no one knows your name. You carry buckets, clean floors, serve drinks, patch clothes, press grapes, lift hay bales, dig ditches, and none of it earns respect. If anything, it earns suspicion. The guards watch you more closely than they do the actual criminals, because poor looks like trouble to those who've never missed a meal. Yet despite it all, there's a rhythm to this life, a way of existing that has persisted for centuries. You laugh when you can, you sing if your throat allows it, you gossip, because what else is free? And you hope, always hope, that this year might be better, that the next tax might not arrive, that the next baby might survive, that the king might... No, never mind. Best not to finish that thought. Walls have ears, even if yours are half frozen. There are moments of beauty, a market melody, a warm breeze, the way the light hits the church window just right. You collect these like trinkets, store them away like coins, because joy is rare and should be hoarded. And so your day begins, with the groan of wooden floorboards, the scrape of rough bread against hungry teeth, and the weight of knowing that today, like yesterday, you will work hard and still fall behind. But before we get to that, let's explore your favorite subject, food, or rather, the idea of food. Because in pre-revolutionary France, hunger isn't an occasional visitor, it's a permanent roommate, bread. It should be a comfort, shouldn't it? A simple pleasure. Warm, soft, filling. But in your world, bread is less a comfort and more a crisis management tool, when it's available at all. In the France you wake up in, bread is not a side dish, it's the dish, the centerpiece of nearly every meal, every day, and every mood. And right now, that centerpiece is harder to come by than royal honesty. You leave your tiny home, coins jangling softly in your pocket, though jangling may be generous. It's more like a lonely clink. The baker's queue already stretches down the street. Everyone's wearing the same expression, hungry and mildly hostile. You take your place in line and brace for the usual combination of grumbling, elbowing, and passive-aggressive sighing. The price of bread has risen again. It always rises. Flour is scarce, bakers are nervous, and rumors swirl like wood smoke. Hoarding, bad harvests, officials stockpiling grain for nobles. People whisper that the palace has vaults full of wheat, while children cry themselves to sleep on empty stomachs. No one knows if it's true, but no one really doubts it either. When the bread does arrive, one coarse, dense, misshapen loaf, you take it. Gratefully, or rather, resignedly. It's not white. It's not soft. It's a dark, slightly sour hunk made from whatever the baker could grind that morning. Sometimes it's rye, sometimes barley. Occasionally you swear there's sawdust in it, or bits of mold, or stone grit that could chip a tooth. It doesn't matter. You'll eat it, because there's nothing else. Meat, that's for Sundays, if you're lucky, or for when a neighbor's pig dies unexpectedly. Cheese, rare and rationed. Vegetables, seasonal and scarce. Eggs are precious. Milk goes sour before it reaches the city. And salt, blessed salt, is so heavily taxed thanks to the gabelle that you hoard it like treasure. You might have a pinch in a jar somewhere, guarded like a family heirloom. You chew slowly, more from caution than pleasure. The bread fills your stomach just enough to keep the gnawing pain at bay, but it doesn't last long. By afternoon, you'll be hungry again, and tomorrow the price might rise again. Sometimes there's no bread at all. Then you survive on gruel, watery soup thickened with whatever scraps you can find. Roots, peels, cabbage that looks like it's lived too many lives. Children cry from hunger. Adults just grow quiet and brittle. People begin to eye the baker's cart with the same gaze they once reserved for wedding cakes or love letters. Bread riots happen, They're not even unusual anymore. A rumor spreads that a cart of grain is being sent to the palace. A crowd forms, someone shouts, a rock flies, and suddenly you're in the middle of something terrifying and electric. Not quite rebellion, not quite theft, just raw, desperate survival. Mothers screaming, fists flying, loaves torn apart mid-air. The baker ducks. Soldiers may arrive. People scatter. No one wins. In the countryside, things aren't always better. When the weather turns bad, crops fail. Grain rots in storage or is eaten by rats. The land, worn thin from years of overuse, gives less each season. Farmers try to store grain for winter, but officials come knocking. Tithes to the church, taxes to the crown. Everyone wants their share, especially those who've never held a hoe or planted a seed. And so malnutrition becomes normal. You don't think of it as an illness. It's just how people live. Children are small. Adults are thin. Teeth fall out early. Wounds take longer to heal. Women give birth already tired. Men die in the fields from exhaustion. Hunger isn't just a pang. It's a pace. A constant, quiet background beat. Yet the rumors persist. The palace. Versailles. A wonderland of silk and chandeliers. They say the queen wears gowns more expensive than your entire village, that they eat cakes when there's no bread. You've never seen these cakes, or the queen, or the palace, but the stories burn. They light fires in bellies emptier than your plate. It's said that during one royal banquet, more food was scraped into the trash than your entire neighborhood eats in a week. Turkeys, pheasants, oysters, creams, things you've never tasted and can't pronounce. All gone in an evening of feasting. While you chew slowly on a piece of bread you had to lie to afford. You don't hate food. You miss it. You remember the time your neighbor shared a plum, or when your cousin brought back dried cherries from the countryside. You remember the way butter tasted the one time you had it, the way the village smelled when someone roasted a goose. It wasn't your goose, but the scent felt generous. You tell yourself it might happen again. Still, most days you go to bed with a stomach that mutters more than you do. And even in sleep, your dreams are sometimes just menus. Long tables with platters you can't touch. Food, or the lack of it, shapes everything. Your mood, your energy, your memory, and increasingly, your sense that something's wrong, that something must break. Because a country that cannot feed its people cannot keep pretending to rule them. But those are dangerous thoughts, best to keep chewing. And while you swallow the last bite of gritty bread, someone knocks at your door. Not a guest, not a friend. It's the tax collector, again, ready to explain how even the crumb in your mouth is taxable under the king's divine right. But don't worry, we'll cover that delightful nightmare next. Let's talk about taxes, tithes, and the long, impossible list of things you're expected to pay for when you already can't afford to eat. Taxes. The one thing in France even more reliable than rain and royal debts. If you were hoping this part of the day would offer a little break, a little breathing room after your breakfast of bark-flavored bread, I regret to inform you it's now time to open your purse, and then keep opening it until there's nothing left but pocket lint and a confused beetle. Let's be clear from the start. You, dear citizen, are part of the third estate. That's the bottom rung of the ladder in a system called the three estates. The first estate is the clergy, bishops, abbots, the holy folk who live quite unhumbly. The second estate? Nobility, obviously. Landowners titled lords. Ladies with powdered wigs taller than your roof. And then there's you, the third estate. Everyone else. Farmers, labourers, merchants, tailors, bakers, barmaids, and the poor soul who's currently trying to explain to their child why there's a tax on salt, but not on powdered sugar wigs. Now, in theory, estates are about responsibility and structure. In practice, they're about who pays and who doesn't. And you do. A lot. You pay taxes to the king. A portion of your earnings, if you have any, is claimed for the crown. Doesn't matter if your crops failed or your tools broke. You owe. The king has wars to fight, debts to repay, and velvet curtains to import. And if you think those royal fountains maintain themselves, you clearly don't appreciate the complexities of aristocratic plumbing. You also pay taxes to the church. That's the tithe. 10% straight off the top, no questions asked. Even if you haven't seen a priest in weeks, or the nearest church is mostly pigeons and collapsed masonry, you pay it because the church needs wine, and apparently God doesn't accept IOUs. Then there's the local lord. Maybe he's a baron, maybe a viscount, maybe just someone who inherited his title after sneezing at the right time. Regardless, he gets his share. Sometimes it's in grain, sometimes chickens, sometimes your actual labor. This is feudalism. You're tied to the land, and the land is tied to him. Congratulations, you're paying rent to a person who hasn't lifted anything heavier than a feather quill since birth. Let's not forget the feudal dues, because one tax isn't enough. There are taxes on mills, on ovens, on bridges, on markets. If you want to bake your own bread, you might still have to pay to use the Lord's oven. Want to sell vegetables? That'll be a tax on the stall. Planning a wedding? There's a fee for that too. Dying? That's a whole separate tax tier. And if you're in the countryside, you'll be treated to the special misery of the corvée. This is unpaid labor for the king, which sounds like a favor, but is actually a mandate. Fixing roads, digging ditches, mending bridges, all tasks you're required to do, usually during the exact moment you needed to be harvesting your own fields. If you're lucky, the shovel has a handle. If you're not, the pothole has a name. Meanwhile, the nobles, the very people who live in big houses and wear shoes made of silk and indifference, they don't pay taxes. In fact, they collect them. When times are tough, they raise dues. When times are good, they raise them anyway. You might think that someone would object, but the nobility has laws, traditions, and lots of very sharp swords. There's no representation. You can't vote on your taxes. You can't negotiate. You can't plead. If your harvest was bad, your family's sick, your tools stolen, the answer is the same. Pay. Or the bailiff shows up and starts looking at your furniture like it's already on the auction block. And then there's the salt tax, the infamous gabble. Salt is essential. It preserves food, flavors soup, keeps meat from becoming a biology experiment. And yet, it's so heavily taxed that entire black markets form around smuggling it. Salt runners, that's an actual thing. People go to jail for salt. You know it's bad when seasoning your dinner feels like an act of rebellion, and you keep paying. Somehow, year after year, until you can't. Until something inside you, and 1,000 others, starts to whisper that maybe this isn't how it has to be. That maybe, just maybe, the nobles should pay too. That maybe the clergy doesn't need a chandelier in the outhouse. That maybe the king doesn't understand how hard it is to eat tax receipts. This isn't revolution yet. Not quite. But the ground is shifting. The mood is souring. You hear muttering in the market, at the well, in the wine shop. People are tired. Of bread lines, of tax lines, of being told by powdered faces that everything is just fine. You don't own a pamphlet, but someone reads one aloud while others pretend not to listen. The words are sharp, the ideas dangerous. Equality, representation, justice. You don't know who wrote them, but you know they feel truer than any sermon you've heard in months. And suddenly, there's a murmur you can't quite quiet. A sense that something is coming. Not a nobleman, not a plague. Something louder, but for now, you return home. Empty pockets, empty stomach, full of questions. The streets are still quiet, but the cafes are buzzing. The pamphlets are printing. And someone, somewhere, just raised a glass and shouted something bold. We'll talk about that next. The strange, caffeinated, revolutionary noise growing louder in the corner of every room. Gossip, printed leaflets, and the odd fellow in a tricorn hat who's just a little too well informed. You hear it before you see it. A murmur, a whisper, a voice just slightly louder than polite conversation. The coffee is terrible, the chairs are uneven, and the room smells like wet wool and boiled onions. But the cafe is full, not with silence, but with something else. Gossip. Dangerous, delicious gossip. Welcome to revolutionary Paris, where the buzz in the room is sometimes louder than the street outside. You're not alone. This place, A smoky, mismatched collection of wooden tables, tin cups, and leaning coat racks has become the new hearth for the city's mind. People don't just come here for caffeine. They come for conversation and maybe a little conspiracy. You sip something that might be coffee or might be what happened when a boot met boiling water, and you pretend to be thinking about bread prices. Really, you're listening. Every table is a universe. That one in the corner is discussing Rousseau's latest ideas. Not that anyone has read them firsthand, but someone heard someone mention them at a salon. That table by the window, whispering about grain merchants hoarding flour and how the king probably knew. And the group near the stove, arguing about whether liberty means not paying taxes or not being executed for saying so. Pamphlets flutter through the room like rebellious butterflies. They're everywhere. Some well-written, most not, all angry. Crude woodcuts of the king sweating, the queen spending, and peasants rising. You don't need to be able to read them. Someone will read them aloud, loudly, and badly, with exaggerated voices and theatrical flourishes that somehow make the injustice feel more real. These little paper bombs are spreading fast. In the 1780s, pamphlets became their own underground economy. Printers popped up in attics and basements. Smugglers passed stacks like contraband. Censorship laws still technically exist, but enforcement is selective. There's just too much paper, too many words, too many people willing to risk a night in jail for the thrill of reading something banned. And the ideas in these pamphlets, they're fire. They don't just criticize taxes or laws. They talk about rights, about liberty, about the idea that maybe, just maybe, the third estate isn't just the bottom, that it is, in fact, France. You read it once and feel a shiver. Read it twice and feel a shift. Read it 3 times and start checking behind you when you walk home. Because here's the thing, not everyone likes pamphlets, or cafes, or freedom of speech. The crown certainly doesn't. The nobility doesn't. The police? They're confused and overworked, but if they hear you repeating what you read in that leaflet with the caricature of the bishop holding a wine bottle and a money bag, you might spend a few days in a cell that smells like sadness and wet cheese, so you speak in code. The baker down the street might be a metaphor for the king. The weather's changing could mean revolution, and everyone around you nods a little too slowly, a little too carefully, because in this city, the walls might have ears, and worse, so might your neighbor. Salons are the more refined version of this chaos. If you're lucky enough to be invited, you might attend one hosted by a well-read widow with a collection of art and opinions. The wine flows, the candles flicker, and someone quotes Voltaire. Loudly. Several times. There's always one. These gatherings are meant to be civil. But even here, beneath the powdered wigs and polite laughter, there's tension. Everyone's waiting for the moment someone says something too bold, too radical, too true. And when it happens, the room goes quiet. Just for a breath. Then someone coughs. The host smiles. And conversation resumes as if it never faltered. Back in the taverns, the revolution is less philosophical and more fermented. Workers grumble into mugs of weak beer. The innkeeper nods too quickly at jokes about guillotines and quietly worries about her license. A bard sings a reworded folk tune, something about heads rolling and hearts rising, and the applause is just cautious enough to be sincere. And somehow, between the pamphlets and the protests, between the coffee and the wine, it begins to feel like something is happening. You're not sure what. You're not sure how. But people are listening. More every day. They lean in a little closer. They read a little faster. They laugh a little louder, but never too loud. Not yet. Because fear still lingers. The Bastille still looms. The guards still march. And the king still rules. In theory. But the city no longer whispers out of habit. It whispers because it's waiting. For the right spark. For the wrong tax. For one loaf too few. So you fold the pamphlet into your coat. You leave the cafe. You nod at the watchman. You walk home as if the cobblestones aren't buzzing beneath your feet. As if something isn't shifting, just under the surface. You duck into your street, quiet and crooked. You pass shuttered homes, curtained windows, flickering candles, and you wonder how many others read the same thing. felt the same chill, smiled the same smile, slept the same uneasy sleep. Tomorrow you'll walk the streets again. You'll see more posters, hear more whispers, sip more bad coffee, and maybe, just maybe, feel a little less afraid. But for now, you rest. The city exhales, the rumors sleep, but not deeply. And behind the walls of the palace, someone is starting to realize that they might not be in charge of the story much longer. In the next chapter of our quiet journey through revolution, we'll follow you down those Parisian streets and beyond, into the overwhelming, overflowing, astonishing chaos of daily life in the city. The sights, the smells, the sewage. It's not just politics that shaped the French Revolution. Sometimes it was just surviving the sidewalk. Paris, the beating heart of a changing France, is alive, and it wants you to know it. It doesn't whisper, it shouts, it groans, it leaks, and somehow you live in it. The morning air smells like ambition. If ambition were soaked in cabbage water and stepped in by 20,000 pairs of unwashed shoes. The streets are paved, theoretically, but mostly what you feel underfoot is mud, manure, and yesterday's regrets. Some of it might have been dinner. Some of it might have been something much worse. The gutters overflow. The chamber pots are emptied with the same enthusiasm as revolutionary slogans, loud and from above. If you walk without looking up, you do so at your own peril. It's common to hear a quick shout, "Garde à l'eau," right before someone dumps the contents of their night into the alley below. If you're lucky, you dodge. If not, well, it was time to change shirts anyway, even if you only own one. There are pigs, actual pigs, roaming freely through neighborhoods, snuffling through garbage, getting into arguments with dogs and winning. Children follow them, often barefoot, often screaming, often sticky with something that might be jam or might be plague. The air itself is thick. It's not fog, not quite smoke, not entirely human despair. But it's there, like an extra coat you didn't ask for. Fires burn in chimneys, stew pots bubble from open windows, and somewhere a street vendor is loudly insisting that his eels are fresh, even though no one asked. And then there are the sounds. Wheels clatter against cobbles. Merchants shout in the markets. A dog barks at a cat who hisses at a rat who really just wants to nap. Someone sings off-key. Another yells about taxes. And over it all, the bells ring, calling some to mass, others to work, and a few to wonder whether they're tolling for something bigger. You make your way to the market, which is less a place and more a state of mind. It's loud, crowded, and always just on the edge of violence. Bread is the central character, and its price changes with the wind. If you're lucky, you can buy enough to feed your family. If you're not, you get to hear someone blame the queen. Again, a butcher yells about his cuts. A fishmonger insists her catch is fresh. The fish does not agree. You try to haggle, but there's no room. Prices are high, patience is low, and the crowd has elbows like bayonets. You work somewhere, maybe in a cramped shop, maybe as an apprentice in a tradesman's stall, maybe selling candles, buttons, or something even more forgettable. The hours are long, the space is tight, and the air is always warm in the wrong way. Your boss shouts instructions over the din, and you nod while trying not to pass out from the heat and the smell of wet wool and old cheese. There's little privacy, even less room. If you're a servant, you share sleeping space with other workers, eat in the kitchen if you're lucky, and hear more of the family drama than you ever wanted. If you're a street vendor, your day starts before the sun rises and ends long after your feet go numb. If you're one of the city's many laborers, your hands are cracked, your back aches, and your only reward is surviving another shift without injury or insult. Sometimes a parade passes by. A noble family, perhaps, or a cart bearing someone to prison. The crowds gather. Some cheer, some spit, some quietly memorize faces and slip away. In Paris, the line between entertainment and warning is very thin. The city isn't just buildings and bodies. It's tension, pressure, a pot slowly reaching boil. Every day feels louder than the last. The pamphlets on the wall are torn down by night, replaced by new ones come morning, each one angrier, each one more daring. And through it all, you live. You step around puddles. You dodge pigs. You stretch your wages like stale dough. You listen more than you speak. You nod at the right people and avoid the ones who seem too enthusiastic about politics. You pretend not to see the soldiers on patrol. You pretend the man with the wild eyes and loud voice is just a drunk and not a prophet. You survive, just barely. Paris gives you everything and takes it back with interest. And in those moments, when the noise fades for a heartbeat, when the fog lifts just enough to see the dome of a church or the outline of the Bastille in the distance, you wonder if anyone's really in charge anymore, or if the city itself is making its own plans. At night, you return home, maybe to a narrow apartment above a shop, maybe to a shared bed near the back of a tenement. You light a candle, listen to the creaks of neighbors moving about, and try to forget the rats scratching in the walls. Someone sings a lullaby in the next room. Someone cries. And someone knocks once, then walks away, maybe delivering a secret, maybe checking if you were home. Tomorrow will bring more noise, more mess, maybe even more blood. But for now, Paris sleeps. Fitfully, noisily, almost rebelliously. Beyond the city walls, though, another world waits. Fields stretch toward the horizon. Cows chew slowly in mud. Farmers rise before dawn and end the day covered in dust and doubt. While Paris shouts, the countryside struggles quietly. A different kind of suffering. A different kind of silence. And next, we'll wander there. To the farms and villages where revolutions don't start with pamphlets. They start with hunger. The city may stink, but the countryside starves. Life beyond the noisy boulevards of Paris isn't quiet because it's peaceful. It's quiet because exhaustion doesn't leave room for complaints. In the rural heart of France, your morning doesn't begin with birdsong so much as the distant grunt of a cow and the immediate realization that your feet are still wet from yesterday. The roof leaks, the floor is dirt, your breath fogs in the air, and the fire has long since gone out, if it ever truly lit in the first place. You are a peasant, one of millions. You don't own much. In fact, you probably don't own the land you live on. You farm it, tend it, sleep near it, and hope the local noble doesn't decide he wants it back, or that the tax collector doesn't visit with too many questions and not enough mercy. The workday begins before the sun and ends only after your body does. Your hands are calloused, your knees ache like they've been cursed, and your back has long since decided to mutiny. You rise because there's no other option, and because the animals aren't going to feed themselves, unfortunately. You work the land, wheat, rye, barley, whatever the soil might allow this year, but you rarely eat what you grow. Most of it goes elsewhere, to taxes, to tithes, to the local seigneur who occasionally nods in your direction when he rides past on a horse that probably eats better than you. Your tools are simple, often broken, and sometimes held together with string, prayer, and a faint hope that this will be the year they don't shatter in the middle of planting. A wooden plough, a rusty sickle, a wheelbarrow that seems more philosophical than functional. You use them anyway, because that's all there is. Seasons rule your life like distant monarchs. Spring is frantic. Summer is sweaty, autumn is tense, winter is cruel. Each year promises a better harvest, and each year finds a new excuse to disappoint. Drought, flood, locusts, greedy merchants. You hear maybe next year so often that it starts to feel like a lullaby. There's no insurance, no safety net. If the harvest fails, you tighten your belt. Then you tighten it again. And when there's no more belt left, you sell what little you have, and then you beg. Hunger becomes a way of life. You know the sound of an empty stomach better than you know most of your neighbors' names. Bread is your staple. Thin, coarse, barely enough to hold together. And sometimes it's not even bread, just mashed roots pretending to be something more edible. Meat. Maybe on holidays, or in your dreams. You live in a small stone or wooden cottage, shared with too many people, and not nearly enough clean air. The thatched roof droops like it's tired too. Smoke from the cooking fire curls into your eyes because there's no chimney. Your children sleep under thin blankets, if they're lucky, and scratch their lice bites like it's a daily routine. Because it is. And yet, despite it all, you manage. You mend your clothes for the 5th time. You patch the hole in the roof with a smile and some dry sarcasm. You joke with your neighbor about your mutual lack of teeth. You complain about the weather with all the enthusiasm of poets. Because complaining is free, and in this economy, that makes it priceless. The village priest offers sermons about patience and heaven, but even he looks thin these days. The baker, when he has flour, sells loaves the size of fists and the weight of hope. And the tavern, small and smoky, is where people trade gossip, wine, and increasingly dangerous opinions about the king. Because make no mistake, people are paying attention. Even if you can't read, you hear things. A noble was dragged through the mud in Paris. A pamphlet said the queen bought a diamond necklace while children died of hunger. Someone else heard someone say that someone somewhere is forming a national assembly. You don't fully understand what it all means, but you understand enough. You understand that you're tired, that life shouldn't be this hard, that your hands shouldn't be cracked to the bone just to afford a handful of salt. You understand that the noble in the big house hasn't worked a day in his life and yet demands everything from you. Still, rebellion is a distant thunder. It's not here yet, not in your village, not on your farm. You still nod politely when the taxman arrives. You still bow your head at church. You still smile when the overseer passes by, even as your fists clench behind your back, because you're patient. You've had to be. But the patience is wearing thin. The murmurs are louder now. The jokes are sharper. The bread is harder. The rain is colder. And the people, once silent, are starting to mutter. And somewhere far, far away, in a palace glittering with gold, the queen is said to have smiled. She ordered another gown. She admired her reflection in a mirror taller than your house. You've never seen her. You've never been to Versailles. But you've heard the stories. The fountains that never run dry. The tables that groan with meat and wine. The perfumes, the powdered wigs, the golden spoons. It all sounds like fantasy or insult. Maybe both. Because while your village argues over mouldy turnips, Versailles serves 12-course meals to bored aristocrats who've never dirtied their hands with anything rougher than velvet. The palace is a world away, but its shadow still falls on your thatched roof, and tomorrow you'll wake up, stretch your aching limbs, and do it all again. But this time, you'll be listening a little more closely, because the countryside is stirring, and even dirt roads can lead to revolutions. Next, we'll step closer to that glittering world of mirrors and mistakes. We'll visit Versailles, not as honored guests, but as hungry eyes peeking through the gilded fence, watching as a kingdom dances its way toward collapse. While you drag a splintered plough through a frost-hardened field, or haggle over onions in a stinking alley, far off in Versailles, the sun glints off windows taller than your entire cottage. The palace isn't just big, it's surreal. A golden monument to just how little the people who run your world understand about living in it. Versailles. Even the name sounds fancy. A syllable too long, a tone too delicate. If your teeth hurt from bad bread and your boots are 3 winters past replacement, just saying Versailles might make you clench your jaw. Because you've heard about it. Everyone has. It's where the king lives. Where the queen strolls through gardens that cost more than your village. Where decisions are made, or at least flounced around in ribbons until someone signs a decree that doubles your taxes. To most of the country, Versailles might as well be another planet. Rumors swirl faster than actual news. Golden chandeliers bigger than hay carts. Mirrors that stretch for miles. Gardens trimmed with more precision than a royal mustache. They say the fountains dance. They say there's a room just for wigs. They say the queen has a house built just to pretend she's poor, with fake chipped paint and staged sheep. And that last one? It's true. Marie Antoinette's Hameau de la Reine, the Queen's Hamlet, was a quaint little fantasy tucked into the gardens of Versailles. It had rustic cottages, a working dairy, even a mill. Except nothing was truly rustic. The walls were carefully weathered by artists, the animals well fed, and the dairy mostly ornamental. While real peasants scraped mold off stale loaves, the queen and her friends played at simplicity, with porcelain buckets and embroidered aprons. Court life wasn't all dancing and dessert, though. Inside those gilded halls, the aristocracy suffered from its own kind of madness. Etiquette ruled with the stiffness of a starched ruff. Courtiers rose early not to work, but to watch the king wake up. Literally, the morning lever, the royal rising, was a ceremony. If you were important enough, you got to hand the king his sock. His sock. That was a career highlight. Bureaucracy filled the palace like perfume fills a boudoir. There were ministers for wine, ministers for war, ministers for post, and probably a guy who managed the upholstery. Everything had rules. You didn't just walk down a hall. You promenaded. You didn't speak. You declared. And you certainly didn't eat without navigating a hierarchy of forks that would confuse even the most determined squirrel. Meanwhile, out in the streets and fields of France, people were eating soup made from boiled weeds and praying their children's shoes would last until the thaw. That's the disconnect. While you lose sleep over a missing chicken and wonder if your son will be conscripted into another losing war, someone at Versailles is writing poetry about the way cream settles in their morning coffee. It wasn't just the food and the fashion that caused resentment. Though watching someone wear diamonds while your neighbor dies of untreated fever certainly doesn't help. It was the complete lack of awareness. The ruling class didn't just ignore your suffering, they denied it existed. Poverty, exaggerated, hunger. You're probably just being dramatic. That bread you can't afford? It's clearly a moral failing on your part, not the result of decades of corruption, crop failure, and endless wars. Versailles became a symbol, not just of wealth, but of waste. Not just of monarchy, but of misunderstanding. It gleamed with polished marble and polished ignorance, a place where nobles debated philosophy between courses of roasted pheasant, and then voted to raise taxes on salt because their wine cellar renovations ran over budget. Of course, not every noble was oblivious. Some genuinely tried to help. Some gave to the poor. Some even visited their estates once in a while. But by the late 1780s, that wasn't enough. The system was too bloated, too brittle. The old ways of power, of privilege, of powdered wigs and powdered arguments were beginning to crack. The king, Louis XVI, wasn't evil, just indecisive, fond of locks, oddly enough. Yes, locks, the kind with keys. He was a hobbyist, made his own mechanisms. While the country burned with debt and unrest, he fiddled with hinges. Meanwhile, Marie Antoinette became the scapegoat for everything wrong in France. Let them eat cake, she supposedly said, except she didn't. It was made up, but it stuck, because it felt true. She didn't say it, but the sentiment echoed loudly from the marble halls of Versailles. And so, while the palace waltzed, the countryside whispered. While silk rustled at court, pamphlets rustled in alleyways. The distance between crown and crust widened with every rumour, every tax, every famine. And though few had ever seen Versailles with their own eyes, everyone carried it in their minds. A shining target, a golden scapegoat. You may never have stepped foot in its echoing halls, but its shadow reaches all the way to your wooden floor. You may never wear velvet or own porcelain, but you know enough to feel insulted by the idea that someone plays peasant while you live the real thing. Because while Versailles shimmered, the rest of France simmered. And in that simmering, something else was brewing. Something quieter but just as powerful. In the markets, in the sewing rooms, in the kitchens and the wells, women whispered. They talked. They listened. They watched. So now, as the palace curtains flutter and the Queen's orchestra tunes another sonata, we'll step away from gilded balconies and into the more hidden spaces of revolutionary France, into the lives of the women, the ones who held it all together, who suffered, survived, and slowly began to stir. You wake with a child's heel in your ribs and a back that already aches before you sit up. The hearth has long since gone cold. There's no firewood left, and no one remembers who was meant to fetch it. You rise anyway, because the bread won't bake itself, and the baby won't stop coughing, and Madam at the big house wants her linen scrubbed and returned before noon. You are a washerwoman, or a maid, or maybe just a mother with too many children and too few shoes between them. You don't have a title. You don't get one. You're not Madame. You're just you there. You bend, you carry, you clean. The reward? More to clean. There are men who speak of revolution, of liberty, and the rights of man. But you have never had the luxury of abstract thought. You have calluses where others keep ideals. Your days are filled not with pamphlets and philosophy, but with fetching, boiling, kneading, sweeping, sewing, cooking, and hoping. Mostly hoping. Hoping the bread rises, hoping the baby's fever breaks, hoping the rent collector doesn't come early. French women in the 1780s were not idle background figures. They were the ones keeping everything from collapsing, if only by the strength of their own exhausted hands. They labored in silence mostly, not because they were meek, but because they had no breath left for shouting. Words are expensive when your lungs are full of chimney smoke and your day starts before dawn. Many worked as domestic servants, scrubbing someone else's floor, someone else's silver, someone else's life. Others worked as seamstresses or hawkers, trying to sell stale herbs or half-spoiled vegetables. Some were midwives, healers, or laundresses, jobs that came with skill and respect, but very little pay. And some, especially in the countryside, did all of the above while tending to livestock, children, and their own gardens. A day off. That's not a phrase that's ever been uttered in your direction. And through it all, you listen. Because listening is free, and power often enters through the ear long before it reaches the fist. You hear the grumbling at the market, the fury over rising bread prices, the whispers that the Queen has diamonds while your daughter has no milk. You hear your neighbour's grief when her 6th child dies of something with no name. You hear that a fishmonger's wife refused to serve a nobleman. You hear, and you remember. In a time before mass media, women were the network. Gossip wasn't just idle chatter, it was survival intelligence. You knew which baker stretched, the dough, which house was hiring, which tax was coming next. And eventually, you began to hear something else. Anger. Not the loud, showy kind from pamphlets and podiums. A quieter, smouldering anger. It brewed in soup pots, in laundry lines, in whispered prayers over sick children. Fact, it was often women who rioted first when food became scarce. The so-called bread marches began not with revolutionaries, but with mothers. Parisian women, angry and hungry, stormed bakeries and markets demanding grain, loaves, anything. Not because of politics, because of survival. The body revolts before the ballot does. And then came October 1789. Nearly 7,000 women, market workers, fishwives, servants, seamstresses, mothers, marched from Paris to Versailles. 12 miles. In the rain. They were not there to curtsy. They were there to demand bread, to demand that the king see them, that the court feel hunger not as an idea but as a sound, the sound of footsteps, soaked skirts, and furious shouting. They weren't armed with rifles or sabers. They carried knives, cooking tools, anything that could be turned into a weapon. They dragged cannons through the mud with their bare hands, and when they reached Versailles, they did not politely knock. They banged on the palace gates. They pushed their way in. They stood in the halls where kings woke and queens powdered their cheeks, and they demanded bread. Some of them didn't survive the return trip, but many did, and they didn't go back to being silent. Because revolution isn't just made in salons and parliaments. It's made in kitchens, in laundry tubs, in the cry of a child whose mother cannot feed her, in the woman who finally says, enough. So when the storm does hit, when the Bastille falls and the tricolour rises and the people begin to sing louder than they starve, it is not a surprise. It is a culmination. It's the sound of thousands of shoes, soft and worn, marching all at once. And now, as you wind down from the long and lopsided world of daily labour, you feel it. Something stirring in the air. Not the sharp crack of revolt. Not yet. But a tremble. A breath. A weight about to shift. Because history doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It seeps through broken windows. It's carried in buckets. It sleeps in shared beds. And when it wakes, the world changes. Let's walk now toward that turning point. Not with drums and banners, but with quiet steps. Into the shadow of the prison. Toward the fortress that will fall. The Bastille awaits, not for glory, but for opening. The morning doesn't feel like history. It feels like any other. Warm breath in tight rooms, the clatter of buckets, the muttering over bread that's already going stale. You're just trying to make it to noon without stepping in horse dung or being shouted at by a baker. And yet, today is different. Something's off. It starts with noise, more than usual. Not just the usual market yells or cartwheels squeaking over cobblestones, but something else. Shouting, but not the kind tied to prices or gossip. A different pitch, urgent. You peer out a window, or maybe over a wooden fence, and see men running, women pointing, boys scaling barrels for a better view. In the distance, above the rooftops and smoke, there's a column of black rising into the sky. It's coming from the east, from the Bastille. You've passed the Bastille before. The looming fortress prison with high stone walls and deep shadows. It's the sort of building you try not to think about. People go in, they don't come out. Mostly, it's a place for noble quarrels and whispered arrests. It doesn't affect you, not directly, not until today, because now, on July 14th, 1789, the Bastille is under siege, and it's not noblemen laying siege. It's your neighbors, bakers, blacksmiths, apprentices, widows, the boy who sells onions near the bridge, and they have weapons. Where did they get them? No one knows. The armory was looted, the guards overwhelmed. It's all happening at once. You clutch your shawl tighter. It's not that you're against liberty or the idea of rights. You're not sure what those even look like. You're just trying to keep your head down and your hands busy. But it's hard to ignore the shouts, or the smell of smoke, or the faces of people who were quiet yesterday but look very loud today. What does the storming of the Bastille mean to someone like you, who fetches water and men's old shirts for sous? It means confusion. It means excitement. It means danger. Your husband says to stay indoors. Your neighbor says he's going to join. Your daughter says she saw a man in a wig hand out gunpowder wrapped in cheesecloth. And through it all, there's fear, but also something else. A flicker. Of what? You're not sure yet. Historical fact. The Bastille only held 7 prisoners at the time it was stormed. 4 forgers, 2 madmen, and 1 aristocrat whose family wanted him kept quiet. And yet, the prison was a symbol of royal tyranny, of injustice, of fear. And now, it's fallen. They didn't just knock politely. They battled, they bled. Some scaled walls, some looted weapons, some died. And when the smoke cleared, the crowd dragged the governor of the Bastille, Delaunay, into the streets. He begged. He offered bribes. They cut off his head and paraded it on a pike through the city. It's not just a story, it's happening, now. Not in Versailles, not in pamphlets, outside your window, and suddenly, the street corner feels like a question mark. Who's in charge? The king? The National Assembly? The mob? You? You don't know. But something's shifted. People speak louder now. There's a surge in every step. And you? You still have to wash, cook, haul, and stretch a loaf of bread across too many mouths. But now, you do it while listening harder than ever before. There's a bakery 2 blocks away that was robbed during the chaos. Not for money, for flour. The man who ran it said he didn't even see the thief's face, just heard breathing. Then nothing. Even during revolution, people are still hungry. Your friend from the laundry tells you she saw a priest leave his church in plain clothes. She says he looked relieved, or afraid, or both. It's hard to tell anymore. And there's your cousin, the one with the limp from an old harvest accident. He's shouting about forming a neighborhood guard. He wants to make sure the noble's house doesn't get torched. Not because he loves the noble, but because his sister works there and she's still inside. Revolution makes strange allies. You tuck your head down and keep walking. The cobblestones feel hotter than usual. Maybe it's the sun. Maybe it's the fire still burning down the street. You pass a wall scrawled with chalk. À bas les aristocrates. Down with the aristocrats. You're not sure who wrote it. You're not sure if you disagree. You get home, and the children are quiet. They sense it too. That heavy pause between one life ending and another beginning. That breath the world takes before it starts to run again. Faster than you can follow. Tonight, you'll hear people shouting well into the dark. Songs, chants, prayers, and arguments. The stars above Paris will not look different, but the ground beneath you is already shifting. You feel it in your knees, in your breath, in your thoughts you dare not speak aloud. Yet, so sleep now, not because the world is safe, but because it never was. And tomorrow, it may belong to someone else entirely. But for now, you are here, you are quiet, and the storm has passed. For today, let's turn the corner into the days after, where revolution means keeping quiet, and survival is its own politics. The streets have grown quieter, but it's not peace. It's tension, stretched thin and humming like a drawn wire. You don't speak much anymore. Not in cafes, not at market, and certainly not in front of unfamiliar ears. The revolution, once a word that danced like a promise, now arrives with whispers, tribunals, and a distinct fear of being misunderstood. You notice the change most at home. The shutters stay closed more often. The neighbors are polite but brisk. No one lingers. Greetings are half muttered. Eyes dart. A joke can land you in trouble, but even silence has become suspicious. And you're not sure which is worse, saying too much or saying nothing at all. Because now, it's not just about the king, or the nobles, or the Bastille. The revolution has teeth, sharp ones, and they're turning inward. Enter the Committee of Public Safety, a name that feels like a cruel joke if you're just trying to keep bread on the table and your head on your shoulders. This small group now holds immense power. They decide who's loyal enough, who's dangerous, who's next. It's said Robespierre barely blinks before signing a death warrant. You've never seen him, but his name carries weight. It rolls through the alleys like a dropped knife. People vanish. That's the part you notice first. The baker who joked about the National Convention. The man who wore the wrong coloured ribbon. The old woman who sighed when the anthem played. Gone. Sometimes a knock at night. Sometimes a quiet arrest in broad daylight. No explanation. No trial that means anything. Just gone. And the guillotine. Oh, the guillotine. It used to be a rare spectacle. Now it's practically a public service announcement. Behold, it says, what happens to those who question? It's efficient, they say, humane even. The blade falls fast, quicker than a whisper. But still, you hear it in your dreams. Interesting fact, during the height of the terror, some people were executed simply for seeming insufficiently enthusiastic. Reports exist of citizens being arrested for not crying hard enough at funerals of revolutionary heroes, or for sneezing during political speeches, interpreted as mockery. The line between satire and sabotage has never been thinner. You find yourself nodding along with things you don't believe, applauding speeches you don't understand, smiling too hard when the crowd cheers. Because survival now depends not on what you think, but on how convincingly you pretend. Children are warned to say the right things. Wives remind husbands not to mutter at the wine stall. Friends stop visiting altogether. Too dangerous. You can't be accused of harboring traitors if you have no one left to visit. Even fashion is political. Wear the wrong hat, too fine a coat or shoes that look aristocratic, and you're suspect. Some burn their old clothes just to be safe. Simplicity is in. Poor is patriotic. And you've never looked wealthier in your life, in the worst possible way. You remember when the tricolour ribbon was a symbol of unity. Now it feels like a test. Tie it wrong and someone might correct you, loudly, or worse, follow you home. You hear of entire families denounced by jealous neighbours. One man accuses his barber of treason to avoid paying for a bad haircut. Another reports his wife just to be rid of her. The revolution, it seems, has opened the floodgates for every petty grievance to become a patriotic duty. And yet, in the midst of fear, daily life drags on. You still have to buy flour, still wait in line for soap, still mend clothes by candlelight. The mundanity of it all is what's most surreal. You might spend your morning scrubbing a stain from a tunic, and your afternoon watching someone be publicly executed for owning foreign books. There's a new word in the air, thermidor. It means July in the new revolutionary calendar, but it also comes to mean the end of the worst of it. But you're not there yet. For now, the reign of terror is in full swing. The public square smells of blood and boiling tallow. The crowds cheer with forced energy. Everyone tries to look appropriately patriotic, appropriately outraged, and appropriately exhausted. You know better than to question the ever-shifting rules. One week, bread prices are patriotic. The next, they're counter-revolutionary. You nod, You agree. You survive. Every home now has a revolutionary calendar on the wall. 10-day weeks, new month names, no Sundays. Churches are shuttered. Saints replaced with martyrs of the cause. Even time has been rewritten. But time is still passing. Slowly, uneasily. At night, you lie awake more often, listening for footsteps on the stairs, dreading a knock at the door. Your dreams are full of questions you're not allowed to ask. Why did your cousin disappear? Why was that pamphlet illegal? Who decides what makes a citizen virtuous? But you keep those questions to yourself. Fold them up like old letters. Tuck them deep in your memory and smile in public. Because in this moment, staying quiet is survival. And everyone is just trying to stay alive long enough to see what comes next. Let's continue on. Not into rebellion or fear, but into belief, and how even faith had to learn to whisper. The bells don't ring anymore. Not like they used to anyway. Once they told the rhythm of life, mass, marriages, feast days. They called you to prayer, to celebration, to mourning. Now, their silence echoes louder than sound. The great churches are shut. Some looted, others renamed as temples of reason. Stone saints are chiseled faceless, crosses stripped, altars overturned. Candles still burn, but now for speeches, not saints. You pass Notre Dame, no longer a cathedral in the eyes of the state, but a civic temple. A tree of liberty stands where incense once rose. And though the building still breathes sacredness in its bones, it stands confused. Like you, faith, it seems, has been put on trial. Once, everyone in your village knew the parish priest by name. He baptized your children, buried your parents, and fed you wisdom with your wine. Now he's either disappeared, fled to Switzerland, or agreed to take an oath you don't understand, but that everyone whispers about. It's called the Civil Constitution of the Clergy. It means priests must swear loyalty not to God, but to the Republic. Some do, some refuse, and those who refuse are hunted. There's talk of non-juring clergy, rebels in robes. Some continue to hold secret masses in barns or back rooms, lit by candlelight and whispered through tears. Attending these is dangerous, but so is not attending if your neighbor sees and reports your absence. Interesting fact, the French government created the cult of reason and cult of the supreme being to replace Christianity. One was atheistic, the other deistic, both designed to promote revolutionary values like liberty and rational thought. In 1793, the Festival of Reason filled churches with liberty banners, actors in togas, and flaming effigies. Religion was now theatre, with a revolutionary script, but most people didn't understand these new beliefs. They missed the familiar rituals, the rhythm of saints' days, the old calendar with Sundays and holy feasts. The revolutionary calendar made everything feel off. 10-day weeks renamed, months like Brumaire and Thermidor, and year one, as if centuries of life were erased overnight. You still remember when it was January. Now it's Nivose, the month of snow. You think. Sundays disappear, and with them rest. Under the new system, a week is 10 days long, with only the 10th off. Your body doesn't like this arrangement, neither do your bones. Baptisms are frowned upon. Christian names are discouraged. Children are sometimes named after virtues, liberté, fraternité, or even constitution. You hear of one baby named Guillotine. You hope it's a joke. Religious processions, forbidden. Saints' statues, removed. The church bells that once rang out joy or sorrow now toll only for executions, when they toll at all. Some adapt. They mumble prayers in their heads. They kiss rosaries hidden in coat linings. Others give up entirely. Faith, like everything else, has become a luxury too dangerous to afford. And yet, death makes people nostalgic. The guillotine might belong to reason, but grief still belongs to something older. You've seen mourners pause at ruined shrines, lips moving silently. Old women still light candles in hidden corners. And when someone disappears, truly disappears, the ritual of remembrance stubbornly returns. A loaf left at a door. A flower tucked behind a broken statue. A whispered, "Our Father," under the breath. You remember a priest who tried to preach compromise. Said God and liberty could walk side by side. He was arrested the next morning. You heard he's in a prison barge somewhere near Nantes. Or maybe worse. Another fact. During the Reign of Terror, thousands of clergy were executed, exiled, or imprisoned. Some parishes never recovered. The government once tried to replace Sunday with Decady, a secular day of rest. But the people never really loved Decady. It never sang like Sunday did. Children grow up without christenings. Couples marry in front of officials, not altars. Crosses vanish from walls, and stories vanish from hearts. Still, there's a kind of quiet resistance. You hear it in the way old women hum lullabies that used to be hymns, in the way a child draws a fish, the ancient Christian symbol, into dirt when no one's looking. And sometimes, just sometimes, you dream of a bell, a real one that calls you not to run or riot or cheer a death, but to gather, to hope, to pray. But it stays in the dream, because for now, the old faith is hidden, not gone, but cloaked, like a flickering votive behind shuttered windows. And in the distance, louder than any hymn, comes the sharp thud of revolution still moving. Let's walk a little farther now, not toward salvation, but through survival, into the shadow of the guillotine, where silence becomes strategy, and staying unnoticed is your last religion. By now, the fear no longer feels like fear. It's just the air you breathe. The year is 1793, or maybe it's 1794. Honestly, the calendar's been changed so many times you're not sure anymore. They renamed the months, turned weeks into 10-day chunks, and made it year 2 or 3 or something. It doesn't matter. What matters is that someone was taken from your street yesterday. You don't ask why. You don't even ask who. This is the Reign of Terror, and you've learned one thing. Just don't be noticed. In this world, silence is safety. Your neighbors used to shout, "Vive la Révolution," in the market, waving their hats like flags. Now they mutter greetings and keep walking. Loud loyalty is no longer enough. The louder you cheered yesterday, the faster your turn might come tomorrow. Even smiling too much at the wrong moment looks suspicious. Interesting fact, between 1793 and 1794, over 16,000 people were officially executed by guillotine. Another 10,000 died in prison, awaiting trial or simply forgotten. The law of suspects gave the state sweeping power. Vague charges, no defense, no mercy. Being insufficiently revolutionary was all it took. A bad joke, a sigh at the wrong moment, a missing tricolour ribbon. These are now reasons for arrest. Trials last minutes, often less. Some never reach trial at all. They vanish behind prison gates, and then their names appear on lists. If you're lucky, someone smuggles out a goodbye note. If you're not, the silence is all you get. The guillotine, once a symbol of justice and equality, is now just a part of the city's soundscape. Chop, cheers, then silence, and again. You pass the square and try not to look, but sometimes you do. The crowd gathers like clockwork. Vendors sell pastries near the scaffold. Children are lifted to see. It's no longer a shock. It's just routine. And yet, somehow, your laundry still needs washing. Bread must be bought. You stand in line beside a man who might have denounced your cousin last week. You nod politely. You don't talk politics. You don't talk at all. You knew someone who once led chants in the Jacobin Club. Now he's pale, thin, and avoids eye contact. He no longer speaks at meetings. He no longer attends them. Robespierre, they used to call him the incorruptible, a man of virtue, of logic, of terrifying calm. He rose through the chaos with speeches about morality and sacrifice. He believed in the revolution like it was scripture, and he believed in the guillotine like it was a sacrament. He led the Committee of Public Safety, which, as you've probably noticed, is doing more of the opposite. His enemies called him a tyrant. His friends called him careful. You called him Monsieur if you ever had to speak his name at all. The irony. Even Robespierre grew afraid. The revolution began to devour itself. Interesting fact. Georges Danton, once a powerful revolutionary voice, was guillotined in April 1794 by Robespierre's order. Danton begged his friends not to let the revolution become a bloodbath. It was already too late. His head rolled like all the rest. You may have once believed in liberté, égalité, fraternité. Or maybe you never really did. Maybe you just wanted bread, or peace, or for your brother to come home from the front. Now, you mostly want quiet, and to see tomorrow. You keep your home clean. You display the required revolutionary calendar. You attend the festivals, if only briefly. You clap when others do. You laugh at jokes you don't understand, just in case they were meant to be funny. You've learned the rules, or at least you've learned that the rules change, often, and then, without warning, Robespierre falls. It's July again. The heat is thick, and so is the tension. You hear shouting in the street, but this time, it's different. The people who once feared him turn on him. They say he went too far, that he's paranoid, that he wanted to be worshipped like a god, that he's next, and he is. Interesting detail. On July 27th, 1794, 9 Thermidor by the revolutionary calendar, Robespierre is arrested. The next day, his jaw shattered by a failed suicide attempt. He's executed without trial. Alongside him go his closest allies. The crowd cheers. Again, the terror ends, not with a speech, but with a thud. No grand finale, just another list, another cart, another day. After that, it all feels strange. The guillotine doesn't stop right away, but something changes. Fewer trials, fewer denunciations. The fear loosens its grip but never truly disappears. You step outside and hear birds again. Someone sings a song, not a revolutionary anthem, just a love song. It almost feels illegal. You can finally breathe, but shallowly. Because though the terror is over, the revolution isn't. The Directory takes over, a government built by survivors and opportunists. Prices rise, armies march, corruption grows. But at least the execution's slow. Mostly. You still don't trust anyone. You still sleep with one ear open. But you've learned something. Revolutions may start with fire, but they end in ash, soft, grey, and strangely quiet. Let's leave this square now. Its blood washed away by summer rain. The scaffold's gone. The flags droop a little more each day, and the crowd has scattered. But history, it lingers. Just ahead, through the haze of uncertainty and tired leaders, there's a short Corsican man waiting in the wings, polishing medals and planning order. But for now, let's rest in this uneasy calm, because tomorrow brings change again, and possibly another uniform, another anthem, another name to remember, or fear. But tonight, you've survived. Let's step gently into that moment, where terror softens, even briefly, into a dreamless sleep. The king is gone, the queen is gone, Robespierre is gone. And yet, the streets of France are still full of potholes, rumours, and people wondering what exactly they were supposed to be celebrating. This is the aftermath. That foggy place after the shouting has stopped, but before the dust has settled. The revolution was supposed to be the end of oppression, a fresh start, a new calendar, new clothes, new gods, new rules. But mostly, it's just new faces in old chairs, arguing loudly while the price of bread climbs higher than a hot air balloon in a patriotic parade. You wake up, and you don't hear drums or slogans anymore, just the sound of the same neighbour coughing, the same creaking floorboard, and the distant voice of someone wondering where the milk seller went. Because somehow, amid all the reforms and declarations and deeply symbolic beheadings, the milk still doesn't deliver itself. This is France in the late 1790s. Officially, it's the Directory now, a 5-man committee governing a shaky republic. They wear nice coats and say things like liberty and reconstruction while quietly stuffing their pockets. Corruption, you realize, is revolutionary proof. It just puts on a new wig and gets back to work. Interesting historical fact. Between 1795 and 1799, France went through multiple coups and counter-coups, many of them bloodless, but none of them confidence-inspiring. The Directory struggled to maintain control, facing economic instability, food shortages, and rising public anger. So, basically, the revolution overthrew one government to install 5 equally confused ones. And while they argue, you continue working. You're still a tailor, or a porter, or a washerwoman, and taxes still exist. Food is still expensive, disease still spreads, and nobody has quite figured out how to rebuild a country while also reinventing time, religion, law, and dinner. Of course, there are changes. Some are good, some are baffling, some are just different. You can now legally own land, if you're lucky enough to afford it. The noble estates have been chopped up, and auctions are happening across the countryside. If you have savings, or know someone who forgot to declare a property, you might actually end up with a small plot of your own. It's not equality, but it's more than your grandfather ever had. You can also walk through town without bowing to powdered wigs. The titles are gone. There are no more dukes or marquises, at least not officially. You still call the mayor monsieur, but mostly because, hey you, feels rude. And there's more literacy now. Schools are being built, slowly, and new newspapers pop up with headlines like France glorious once again, or Revolution finally successful, again. You read what you can, squinting at the newsprint and wondering if the author actually believes it. Interesting note. During this time, literacy rates in France did begin to rise, especially among urban populations. Revolutionary reforms aimed to educate the citizenry. After all, how can you vote if you can't read? The trouble was, most people were too busy trying to survive to read about how lucky they were. Meanwhile, beyond the borders, France is at war. Still, the revolution terrified the monarchies of Europe. Prussia, Austria, Britain, they all declared war at some point, hoping to stamp out the dangerous idea that commoners with pitchforks could decide things. France responded by building a massive army, mostly from volunteers, sometimes from conscripts, often from people who just wanted a pair of shoes and 3 meals a day. And leading those armies, a man you've probably heard whispered about, a general from Corsica, young, brilliant, oddly fond of dramatic pauses, Napoleon Bonaparte. At this point, he's not emperor yet, but he's already turning heads. His victories in Italy are legendary. His men adore him. The newspapers praise him. His enemies underestimate him. He's still short, that part doesn't change, but what he lacks in height, he makes up for in ambition. Interesting detail. In 1799, Napoleon returns from a disastrous campaign in Egypt. Somehow, despite losing most of his army and the fleet that brought them there, he spins it as a success. That same year, he joins a coup against the Directory. Within months, he becomes first consul, a polite term for I'm in charge now. But you don't know that yet. You just hear the name Napoleon a lot more than you used to. It's always in a hopeful tone, or a wary one, or both. Back home, things remain precarious. The revolutionary calendar is still technically in effect. It has months named after weather patterns, like Brumaire, white foggy, and Fructidor, fruity. Weeks are 10 days long. Sundays are gone. Everyone is confused. You celebrate. Holidays you don't understand, and light candles for saints who've been rebranded as metaphors. The churches are reopening, but cautiously. Religion is no longer banned, just politically awkward. Priests who took the revolutionary oath try to reconcile their sermons with liberty. Others return from hiding. Some say mass quietly, in basements. Faith, like bread, never quite disappears. And the guillotine, it's been moved. Still there, still sharp. But now it's reserved for traitors of a more traditional variety. Counter-revolutionaries, royalists, people who mutter about the good old days. The truth is, nobody knows what comes next. You live in a country that's rewritten itself 5 times in 10 years. A monarchy, then a republic, then something in between, now leaning toward a consul with military boots and good PR. But through it all, life continues. You still sweep your stoop. You still hush your children when someone knocks. You still gather with neighbors, this time whispering about Napoleon and wondering if he'll fix everything. or become just another name carved into marble, while the poor carry buckets uphill. Because that's what history is, from where you stand. Not grand ideas, not speeches, just the same aching back under different banners. Change came, but peace, not quite. You've lost friends, maybe family. You've seen chaos, and maybe taken part in it. You've lived through hunger, hope, and horror. And now, as the fires burn a little lower, you exhale and ask, what was it all for? Was liberty worth the fear? Was equality worth the blood? Was fraternity more than a word painted on a crumbling wall? No one answers, but you keep going, because that's what people do in every chapter of history. They don't write it, they survive it. Now, as the streets of Paris grow quiet again, and the ink of 1,000 pamphlets fades, you feel something you haven't felt in a while. Tired. Not terrified, not triumphant, just deeply, soulfully tired. So rest now. Let the smoke of revolution drift away. Let the slogans soften. The bread will still be bad tomorrow, but tonight you can sleep. Because the shouting is over, for now. And in the distance, someone new is learning how to wear a crown without calling it one. Napoleon looms. But that's a story for another dream. The bread was stale, the air was tense, and the neighbours were always listening. It wasn't the kind of revolution with clean lines or stirring music. It was a slow unravelling, full of coughs in crowded rooms, boots on muddy streets, and muttered prayers for bread that didn't arrive. And through it all, ordinary people, people like you, or rather very unlike you, kept going. They marched, they worked, they waited. They didn't all understand the slogans, or the politics, or the speeches. Most of them didn't care about who wore what sash, or sat on which committee. They cared about eating, breathing, and not being noticed by the wrong person on the wrong day. Let's be honest, you wouldn't last a week. You'd trip over a chamber pot in Paris before dawn. You'd roll your eyes in a cafe when someone quoted Rousseau and accidentally end up on a list. You'd sneeze during a public oath of allegiance and wake up missing your friends, or your head, because this wasn't just a political movement. It was a pressure cooker. And most people weren't trying to change the world. They were just trying to make it to Tuesday without being evicted, arrested, or erased. You wouldn't last the hunger. Not the kind of hunger that comes from skipping lunch, but the kind that grinds your stomach into a dull ache day after day. Bread riots weren't dramatic protests. They were desperate, chaotic scrambles over dusty loaves that might be stretched with sawdust. You wouldn't last the silence either, the kind where you lower your voice, not because it's polite, but because you're not sure if the person beside you will report what you said to the wrong ears. And you certainly wouldn't last the patience. The long, aching endurance it takes to keep living through political change that rarely benefits you. 1 week it's the National Assembly, then the Committee of Public Safety, then the Directory, then something else. And meanwhile, you still owe rent, but they did last. The washerwomen who rose before the sun to clean other people's sheets marched on Versailles when they'd had enough. The farmers who paid taxes with their own grain rose slowly, steadily, until they cracked the old order wide open. The street sellers, seamstresses, apprentices, the whole invisible army of the everyday, made it through fire and fear and 1,000 broken promises. Interesting historical truth. The revolution wasn't won by the loudest voices, but by the quiet persistence of people who couldn't afford to stop living while the world fell apart. They kept baking bread, even when flour was rationed and ovens were watched. They kept sweeping stoops, holding babies, burying their dead, and waiting for the next decree to fall like a hammer. And sometimes, they dared to hope, even in the worst of it, during the terror, during the chaos, during the endless changes in leadership and law, people still held on to moments of stubborn beauty. A song hummed in a workshop, a child's laugh on the steps of a closed church, a freshly patched coat, a smile from someone who still had teeth and wasn't afraid to use them. They found ways to keep their humanity when everything else was uncertain. They mourned without permission. They celebrated without reason. They endured not because they were heroic, but because there was no other choice. The French Revolution was not a single, clean moment in time. It was layers of suffering, hope, action, and failure stacked like uneven loaves in a communal oven. It burned some, it nourished others, and it left everyone changed. You might picture history as a series of famous paintings, heroic poses, fluttering flags, neatly framed ideals. But what made the revolution real were the messy moments, the wet shoes in the muddy street, the arguments in cold kitchens, the ink-stained fingers of someone writing a pamphlet they weren't sure anyone would read. The revolution gave us words like liberty and equality, but it demanded everything from the people who tried to live them. Some gave their lives, others gave their voices, and many gave more than they ever meant to, caught in a storm that didn't ask for their permission, and yet they lived. They survived. Somehow. They sewed. They shoveled. They waited. They remembered which alley was safe and which wasn't. They taught their children when to smile and when to stay silent. They did the hard thing every day. They stayed. So now, as the fires die out and the drums fade, let's leave them there, in their world of candles and cobblestones, powdered wigs and whispered prayers. Let's walk back from their kitchens, their farms, their dusty street corners and dim workshops, back to your world, where bread isn't a riot and you can yawn without fear. Let the revolution rest now. Let the pamphlets curl at the edges and the slogans fade on the walls. Let the names pass gently, Robespierre, Danton, Antoinette, Napoleon, and instead, remember the nameless ones, the ones who carried buckets, raised children, and whispered lullabies even when the sky cracked with gunfire. The ones who survived by being too tired to argue and too stubborn to give in. You wouldn't last, but they did. So now, let the bread cool. Let the cobblestones quiet. Let the church bells pause and the speeches drift away. You're not in the Bastille. You're not in a bread line. You're not on a list. You're here. You're warm. You're safe. And history, full of shouting and silence, can finally rest. While you do too.